Hello, everyone. My name is Mustansir and I work for the JPAC MIA Analytics Pre-Sales team. Welcome to the presentation on the calculation of duration from the Asset Liability Management application. This presentation was prepared on the back of a customer requirement, and I would like to give a quick shout out to Sunny from the Global Sales Hub team and Biplab Kundu from the product management team who provided the expertise and were patient with me as I learned more about this topic. Let's take a look at the definition of duration. It refers to the sensitivity of the price of a bond to interest rate changes. The Macaulay Duration refers to how long it would take for an investor to be repaid its bonds price by its total cash flows. And the Modified Duration refers to the change in price with a 1% change in interest rates. Why is duration important? The Macaulay Duration can be understood as the average number of years an investor must maintain a position in the bond until the present value of the bond's cash flows equals the amount paid for the bond. And the Modified Duration tells you how much your bond price will change in percentage terms with a 1% change in interest rates. This is a measure of interest rate risk. And I've listed two factors that affect the duration: the time to maturity and the coupon rate. The longer the time to maturity, the higher the duration, and the higher the coupon rate, the lower the duration. This is a quick look at the formulas. For those who are mathematically inclined, this will help. And for others like me, we will take a more scenic route as to how this calculation is done. Now, duration for fixed rate instruments, essentially for those instruments where the interest rate does not change during the tenor. And here, if you look at an example where there's interest paid every year and the principal is paid at the end, versus the other, a bullet, where the principal and interest is both paid at the end. The duration would be higher for the bullet versus the simple interest, since the simple interest had more frequent interest payments. This is to help you understand that the frequency and the amount of interest payments has an impact on the duration. Compare this to a floating rate instrument, where the interest rate would reset at an agreed frequency. In this example, 2 years. It is important to establish that even though the principal might only be repaid at the end of the 10th year, from an interest rate risk perspective, duration would consider it to be reset at 2 years in this example. This is to remind you that the liquidity risk in this case would be 10 years, but the interest rate risk is determined by the frequency of the repricing. The ALM application produces the calculation of Macaulay duration and the modified duration from the application. You simply need to select the relevant financial elements from the application during the process run. Let me show you how this is done. You enter the application, you go to Asset Liability Management application, go to ALM processing, go to the static process. You would be setting up a deterministic process. Now, in this case, I'll be looking for the process that I've already set up, the AMBank modified duration. And if I can show you how to select the variable. As you can see in the application, it is easy to select the financial elements that you wish to see the application to calculate by just moving it from the available financial elements into the selected financial elements. Now, I've taken a couple of extra variables. This will help us as we try to decode how these calculations are done by the application itself. I want to take you through the two scenarios given to us by the client. A couple of complexities around the amortization and the repricing. This meant we had to define these in the application. Amortization in this case refers to how the money will be recovered by the bank. That is the amount and the timing of the principal and interest payments. Repricing, on the other hand, refers to when the interest rate charged is going to change. The frequency, the underlying curve, example LIBOR, and the spread can all be changed depending on the nature of the agreement between the customer and the bank. I'm sure all of us have this. Think about your home loan or your mortgage, and then think of amortization and repricing. Now you're experts in this area. Now for scenario A, the customer expects us to set up the amortization for the first 2 years as no payments of principal, and followed by quarterly repayments for the next 8 years. Now let's see how we can set that up. You go into asset liability management, you click on ALM maintenance, you click on patterns, you click on payment patterns, and then I've already set up the scenario that I wish to. So in this case, I'm bank scenario A, and let's take a look at what's in the application. Now what you see on the screen is for the first 2 years, you'll only be collecting interest. And for the next 32 quarters, which is represented by 32 and 3 months, which is 32 quarters, we'll be collecting a percentage of the original balance, and that I put it as 3.125%. Now what this tells the application is that it should look at the original value of the loan, which in this case is 10 million ringgit, and it would basically break down the principal into 3.125% for each of the 32 quarters. Now, similar to how we have set up amortization patterns, you can also set up repricing patterns, which is basically tells the application how the interest charge is going to reset at what point, and if there are any underlying interest rate curves spread that needs to be applied to the particular position in question. So let's look at that by clicking on repricing patterns. And in this case, let's take a quick look at the scenario A repricing, which had a complication. So let's take a look at how we can resolve the complication around the scenario A repricing. The first 2 years, you want to set up 0 interest rate, and you can do that here by setting it up as 2 years. And then when you look at the definition, I set up that there is no interest rate charge, no net rate, no gross rate, no transfer rate. If you look at the next 3 years, and if you look at the definition, I have instructed the application to pick up the Malaysia sovereign curve, which is going to be, in this case, it could have been any of the curves, but in this case, I've chosen the Malaysia sovereign curve, but this could be LIBOR, SIBOR, any of the interest rate curves that are applicable that needs to be set up for that particular instrument. And if you look at the years 5 to 10, if you look at what the definition is, I've set it up as 5%, and that's the net rate and the gross rate, which can otherwise be different for, let's say, tax purposes. And of course, I've set up a transfer rate, which is really another area, which is funds transfer pricing. But here you can see that you can even set that up as a different rate. But in this case, what we'll be really using is the net rate of 5% as part of the calculation. So it looks like a while since we looked at the formulas. So here's a recap again. One thing I wanted to highlight is, as part of the modified duration, we also need a financial element called the yield to maturity. The good news for us is that this is calculated also by the application. And in this case, for this presentation, I'm not going to dive deeper into that. We can do a separate presentation on that to make sure that that's covered off. For our understanding, the duration underscore C in the application is the Macaulay duration, and the modified duration underscore C is, well, you guessed it, the modified duration. Let us have a look at how this is calculated. The details are slightly technical, so please feel free to play this back a couple of times. This is like a Christopher Nolan movie. It gets better the second time around. Now, in order to compute the Macaulay duration, you need the total market value at repricing into time divided by the total market value. Now, the total market value at repricing is here at the top. The time is the difference between, which is given to us as a discount factor term days, as a difference between the 2 dates, which is the date of repricing, which is 30th of June 2020. If you're wondering why the repricing date for scenario A is 30th of June, if you remember, the first 2 years, there was no interest. So it was going to get repriced at the start of the 3rd year. Now, in this case, it basically means the first 8 quarters, there's going to be no repricing. And then the repricing event is going to happen on the 30th of June 2020. Now, that's how we derive the discount factor term dates. Now, what the application would do is, in addition to the principal and the interest that is generated on 30th of June 2020, it has to account for the fact that, remember when we spoke about the repricing, which means that the entire principal amount now is going to get repriced, because now the bank has technically the option to renew this principal amount that is due to the customer at a new interest rate. which means all the future cash flows that are going to happen for this particular loan, which is, as you can see, for the next X many quarters, right, 31 quarters. And the total of that is 9.687500. Now, this is the cumulative value over time. This total has to be brought to today's value. And you can see I've derived the discount factor, and that's a simple calculation here. When you have this Excel file, please feel free to look at it. And also remember that these are outputs from the application as well. So as part of the financial elements, you can even output the discount factor itself, which is really useful when you want to explain the calculation to the customer. Now, what it does is it basically accounts for the total of what's getting calculated as of the 30th of June 2020, and also adds the discounted value of the remaining principal at the repricing event discounted at today's value. Now that we know that the entire amount is getting repriced on 30th of June 2020. So in this case, the total market value that is getting repriced and the total market value is the same, as you can see here. And in this case, what we've done is we've just gone through with that calculation and determined that the duration is 2.25. So you can see even for a 10-year loan, because the repricing event happened at the second year point, the repricing, rather the duration moves towards that 2-year point. Now, if you wanted to see the sensitivity of the change in the value of the bond or the price of the bond with the change in interest rates, which is the modified duration, we have to go through this calculation of taking the Macaulay duration and then dividing it by the yield to maturity and the payments per year. Now, I told you that the yield to maturity is something that's computed for us by the application as well, and that's listed here. And in addition to that, we need the payments per year. Now, the payments per year is 12, which is the year, and you can see the frequency is 24 because the first payment happened after the second year point. So 12 divided by 24 gives us 0.5. And if you go through the math, it basically computes it as 1.99%. So this is how we've calculated it for the first scenario. And you can go through this again, and hopefully things might become clearer with the Excel sheet in front of you. Now let's take a look at scenario B. And here we see that it's a 10 million ringgit loan. It's for 20 years. And the amortization or the repayment is every quarter, followed by the repricing, where the first 5 years it's fixed rate, followed by years 6 to 20 being the variable rate or based on the interest rate curve defined in the application. Now, what you can see is that in terms of the calculation, what the application does is that it pulled out all the cash flows. And in this case, we have the market value that's coming through for the first 5 years. And you can see from 30th March 2018 up to the first repricing point, which is after 5 years, is 30th of June 2023. Now, similar to the first instance, what the application did is that it keeps pulling out the market value at each point, at each quarter as part of the repayment that was being received from the customer for the principal and the interest. And then it looked at all the cash flows that were still due, the principal cash flows at the point of the repricing, to basically recover the 10 million that was to be paid by the customer. And it calculated it as 8.249 million that was still due from the customer. And similar to the first example, we determined the discount factor that was relevant as of 30th of June 2023, because that's the point of repricing. So we determined the discount factor, and we would add the value that is generated as of 30th of June 2023 and the principal amount of 8.249 million discounted by 0.808626 to bring it to today's value as of the 30th of June 2023 cash. Now, the rest of it remains the same. What you see is that we need to calculate the discount factor in terms of the number of days here, and you can see that for each point it would do that, and it keeps computing that as you go through. And then as part of the calculation, it basically calculates at a cash flow date level. It keeps calculating the Macaulay duration. And you can see that it's basically the same formula that we had the last time. It's the total market value, uh, rather it's the total market value of repricing into time divided by the total market value, right? So it's this into this divided by this. And it does it for each of these. And the total of that brings you to 4.30, which is the validation of the calculation that was, which is how the system arrived at this number. Similarly, for the modified duration, it would take this, and yield to maturity is something that is calculated for us by the application. And the number of payments per year is 4, right? Because remember, there was quarterly payment every, in terms of the principal and interest, which makes it 4 payments for a year, which then means that you have 4, and basically do simple math to arrive at it at a cash flow date level, and the total of this is 4.24. And what this tells you is that for a 20-year loan, the duration is approximately 4.3. And again, remember that this is influenced by the fact that the repricing event happened at the 5th year, which means that all of that principal at the 5th year is getting repriced, which is why it's basically shortening or bringing the duration down to the 5th year point, which is around 4.3 years. And the modified duration is basically telling you that if you were to see a change in interest rates by 1%, the price of this bond would move by 4.24%, right? So if it's $1,000 bond, it would move 4.24 up or down depending on the interest rate change. Now, this is very useful for us to know, and if we consider this or compare this with the first example, which was a 10-year loan where the duration was 2.25, and the modified duration, that is the sensitivity of the price of the bond to change in interest rates, is 1.99%. So here, between the two bonds, if you wanted a safer investment, you would say that you might want to choose the first, which is the 10-year bond, which sees less movement in terms of the price because it's at 1.99% versus the second, which sees a much larger movement. That depends on your risk appetite, of course, and your priorities, but this is one way of looking at it. There is one last calculation I want to leave you with: effective duration. What is effective duration and how is it different from modified duration? Well, effective duration looks at the entire stream of cash flows, and as such, it will result in a higher number than the modified duration. I've extracted the steps from the user guide, and you can see them on the screen. Determine 3 market values, and you can start with determining your interest rate curve used for discounting. This is the interest rate curve used to discount the future cash flows to today's present value. Now, the first thing we need to determine is what is the discount rate used for discounting, right? So let's have a look at how it's set up in the application. So for you to determine that, you can go into the application. And in this case, once you enter the application and you go into ALM processing, you go to static process, determine a state. Now, in this case, let me look for the one that I'd set up for the purposes of our calculation, which is ALM modified duration. And if I click here and I go to discount methods, it's telling me that it is ALM discount. Now, the cool thing is, if you want to understand what is the underlying discount curve, you can simply click on this view button. Is that it would bring up another screen. The application actually brings you to the screen of the discount methods. Now, if you want to see what was set up in this particular case, you can just move to assumption less and look for the products where it was set up. In this case, a small and medium enterprise term loan. And if you wanted to look at what exactly was set up for that, if you click here, you would see that the Malaysia FTP base rate was used for the discounting of the cash flow. So this is how we determine what is the underlying discount curve that is used for discounting the cash flows to today's value. Now, in order to determine the market value, which is based on the flat scenario, 1 basis points up and 1 basis points down, you need to use something called forecast rate scenarios. So in this case, if you hover over this, you would see that we're using AMBank forecast rates. Now, in order to find out more details about the AMBank forecast rates, what you can do is you can simply move into the area of the application where it says assumption specification and click on forecast rates. And you would see that there is AMBank forecast rates here. Now, if you wanted to see how exactly it's set up, you could click on this area and click on OK. And then you can see you can actually do a lot of different things here. You can set up changes for currency codes, which is the change in exchange rates or economic indicators. But the one that we're interested in right now is the movement of the Malaysia FTP base rate curve, which is what's going to determine the change in the discounting, which results in 3 different market values, which you need as part of the effective duration calculation. Now, in order to do that, let's look at flat. And the easiest way to do that is to simply move through the screens where you would see the Malaysia FTP base rate curve. And in this case, you see that it's here and it's flat, so you're not expecting any changes. But if you want to see what has happened for 1 basis up, what you can do is click on that and click on the screen where it says just acknowledge that it's okay. And then as you move through this and you click on Malaysia FTP base rate curve, you see that there is a structured change. And if you want to see what this looks like, you can see how it's applied. So what we've done is we've taken the base rate and we have moved it by 1 basis point. So you see that for each of the term points, which is 1 through to 6, right? We have adjusted it by 1 basis point up for each of the periods as well, which is 1 day, 1 month, 3 months, and so forth. Similarly, for 1 basis points down, you can click on that. And as you acknowledge this and you move through to the Malaysia FTP base rate, again, structured change, and you can click on view. And as you guess, this time it's moving it 1 basis points down. Now, this is the input that we need from an application point of view to basically move the interest rate curve or the discount rate curve, in this case, 1 basis point up, 1 basis point down, which will give us the 3 different market values of which we require to do the effective duration calculation. Excellent. So what you see on the screen is that we have calculated for both scenario A and scenario B, and we calculated the market value as per no change in the discount rate curve, and when the discount rate curve was moved up by 1 basis point and when it was moved down by 1 basis point. And then the calculation follows that it looks at the difference between the two up and down, and then divides it by the flat value, which is the market value without any changes. And it's weighted against the 0.02%, right? Which is basically the basis point up and down added together. And you can see that there is a marked difference in terms of the effective duration versus the Macaulay, simply because the effective duration takes account of the entire stream of cash flows discounted at that relevant point, whereas the Macaulay duration, of course, was looking at it from the point of the repricing event itself, right? So there is a significant difference, and this is another option for practitioners in banks to look at this, and it might be useful, and especially when we presenting to this bank, they appreciated that this can also be computed by the application. As you might know, the Oracle ALM application, and indeed the wider Oracle Financial Services Analytical applications, is intrinsically linked to the reporting area. Now, in this case, Oracle Analytics. And what I've done is to show you that all these calculations that we did can actually be exposed as part of Oracle Analytics, and that's what we've done here. And in fact, the effective duration calculation, if you wanted to show the client how that was arrived at, you can simply go into this area and set up a custom calculation, and it's extremely easy to use. You can see that exactly what we had in terms of the Excel is something that I've reproduced here with minimal effort. So this can be something which is very useful to the client, and it can be done at a deal level for the client if required. So again, you have out-of-the-box calculations, which can be validated and then linked to the reporting, which is exactly what the customer would want to hear from Oracle. Thank you for listening so far. Let's recap what we learned. User-defined amortization techniques. So not only do we offer out-of-the-box the vanilla techniques where you might say that you expect a monthly repayment or a quarterly repayment like we did see in scenario B, but when you have something more complex where you have 2 years where you have no payments followed by quarterly repayments, and you can switch it up and sideways, all of that is possible through the payment patterns, and that can be set up as per bank requirements. User-defined repricing techniques. Again, apart from supporting the vanilla repricing techniques where it might be repriced every month or 3 months, especially when there are non-linear requirements, like we did see both in scenario A and scenario B, where there was a fixed rate, then there was a variable rate, then there was a fixed rate again. That's something that's can be very complex to achieve and model, and a lot of our competition might not do this. So again, this is a very good talking point as we go through to customers. We defined rate curves and how we use them as a discount rate curve to achieve the market values. Yeah, hopefully we have a better understanding of cash flows and market value, which is nothing but the discounting of the cash flows to today's present value using the discount rate curve. As part of the effective rate duration, I showed you how to set up the forecast rate scenarios, especially the 1 basis points up and 1 basis points down, which can be easily configured in the application. We ran a deterministic ALM process, and we have out-of-the-box financial measures, including complex calculations like yield to maturity, Macaulay duration, modified duration, which can be explained at a cash flow level to the customer, which is very amazing. And if you can think about it from a validation point of view, this is what customers value from an application like Oracle. Hopefully you have a good or better understanding of Macaulay duration, modified duration, and effective duration. And lastly, the integration of the calculations with the reporting layer. Now, to check your understanding, think about this. A zero coupon bond is a bond with no coupon payments for USD $1,000 is issued on 1st of January 2020 for USD 980 and will mature on 1st of Jan 2030. What is the Macaulay duration of this zero coupon bond? I hope you enjoyed my presentation, and I hope you learned something new. Thank you very much.